One day, two fish were swimming along a river, when one, the more lonely of the two, asked the other, "Do you think there is a perfect fish out there for me?" The other fish, feeling particularly philosophical that day, answered with, "Well, what do you mean by perfect?" The fish, caught off guard by the question, responded to the question with, "I'm not exactly sure, but I hope to meet the perfect fish someday." Trying to push the lonely fish further into his own ideas, the other fish continued by asking, "So you want to meet a perfect fish who is perfect in all the ways a fish can be?" "I'm sorry to say, but the perfect fish, that is perfect in all ways that a fish can be perfect in, does not exist. For there are many different kinds of fish, and all the fish within those kinds of fish are all unique." However, the fish adds, "Since you have brought up the topic, what exactly would a perfect fish have that would make them perfect?" "Well, the fish would have to be a good swimmer, because that's how a fish survives within its environment." "Yes, and what else?" the fish questions. Annoyed by the conversation already, the fish swims off, leaving the philosophical fish with his thoughts. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato would have enjoyed to be a part of the two fishes' conversation, because Plato, one of the first creators of metaphysics, first thought of the ideal forms, or the theory of forms. According to Plato, this theory states that the things in our world, however seemingly beautiful they may be, represent imperfect forms of a single, perfect, ideal form that exists only within our minds. The ideal form inside our minds contains the raw essence of the thing itself. Like the fish stated, we cannot say that there is one perfect fish in the world, because the fish that inhabit our world are all only limitations of the perfect ideal form of a fish. This theory is best explained by trying to draw a perfect circle freehand. Before you even touch your writing utensil, you have, in your mind, an exact idea, or essence, or ideal form of what the perfect circle looks like. But while drawing, you realize that it is practically impossible to draw a perfect circle freehand. The physical world is imperfect representations of the ideal forms we hold within our minds. However, that is not to say that things cannot move closer to their ideal forms. Aristotle, a student of Plato's, built upon Plato's work of the metaphysical ideal forms by creating a more grounded and worldly theory. This is what the modern world now knows as the theory of virtues. The theory of virtues, accepting that a physical form of perfection is impossible, states that a thing can become closer to the perfect ideal form by developing the virtues of that perfect thing. When the fish were talking, one of the fish mentioned that the perfect fish would be a good swimmer. And this is a great example of what a virtue is. A virtue is a quality of anything that makes that thing more in line with its ideal form and natural function. Since every species in the world is different and serves a different function, the virtues of a fish will be much different than the virtues of a human. Therefore, we should not listen to advice from fish because their ideal form and virtues are much different than our ideal form and virtues. But by successfully developing our virtues, we, as humans, can shape an excellent character for ourselves and serve a morally good function. Another definition of virtue is one of a strict ecological sense. This alternate definition defines the traits that allow a certain species to survive and fulfill a unique niche of an area. For example, a bee can both fly and pick up pollen from flowers. Therefore, its virtues, flight and small fuzzy bodies for pollen to travel, allow a bee to fulfill its ecological niche, a pollinator. However, what is humans' ecological niche or function? And what virtues will help us succeed in our niche or function? Good question. Aristotle was the first to give an answer, whether it be right or wrong, to that question. Aristotle believed it was our duty, as the only species on the planet that could use rational thinking instead of instinctual impulses, to act morally and justly. Aristotle, describing our virtues, stated that humans have one grand virtue that every other virtue splits off from, and that virtue was rational thought. Since we can think rationally, we should use it to do good and moral things. To split the large virtue of rational thought into separate, more simple virtues, Aristotle sought to create the now widely known cardinal virtues. The 4 cardinal virtues are prudence, justice, temperance, and courage. First, prudence. Prudence, otherwise known as wisdom, is the use of rational thought to plan to make just and morally correct decisions. For example, if one must do something now without causing harm in order to do good later, the morally correct decision would be to act and plan to do good later. Secondly, justice. Justice is the use of rational thought to balance selfishness and selflessness. In one of the few words we have of Aristotle left, he stated that the virtue of justice consists in a certain equality by which the just and definite claim of one another, neither more nor less, is satisfied. This is separate from the modern definition of justice and is most closely related to the Christian virtue of charity, which I will get to in another video. Thirdly, temperance. Temperance is the use of rational thought to restrain oneself. This is the virtue where we get the phrase, moderation is key. By developing temperance, we gain control of ourselves. Finally, courage. Courage is the use of rational thought to confront fear and overcome difficulty. By believing in our own courage, humanity can overcome fear and strong obstacles. These cardinal virtues, prudence, justice, temperance, and courage, along with the big virtue, rational thought, are the specific human qualities that allow us to fulfill our niche and act morally and justly to enhance our character. While having good virtue helps humans to act morally and justly, having bad virtue, or vice, directly contradicts humans' ability to act morally and justly. Therefore, having vice instead of virtue restricts us from fulfilling our function as humans. Vices are not necessarily the opposites of virtue because they are either a lack of or excess of virtue. Take the virtue of courage, for example. A lack of the virtue courage would be cowardice, while an excess of virtue would be recklessness. By visualizing vices and virtues on the same line, we can better understand the difference. The development of virtues and vices is like the balancing act of being in the middle of a seesaw while 2 elephants are on either side. For example, imagine again the virtue of courage as the balancing point of the seesaw. By moving to the left side or displaying cowardice, we create imbalance on the seesaw and the seesaw falls to the ground. If we move to the right side or display recklessness, the seesaw once again falls to the ground. This balancing act is a characteristic of all virtues, so we must learn to balance our virtues to gain a true understanding of them. So the big question remains, why should humans live a virtuous life? What benefits does a single person gain from being virtuous, moral, and just? The answer to this question does not lie with the individual person. It lies in a community of moral, just, and virtuous people. To give an example of community virtue in action, Merrill Flood and Melvin Drescher, both esteemed mathematicians, invented a famous hypothetical situation in 1950 called the prisoner's dilemma. In this situation, 2 convicts who robbed a bank together are sent in for questioning. The police give each convict an option to stay silent or rat out the other person. The police explain to the convicts that if one convict stays silent, but the other chooses to rat out the other convict, the convict who stays silent will be put in prison for 3 years, and the person who ratted would be let free. If both convicts rat each other out, both convicts will be sentenced to 2 years in prison. However, if both convicts stay silent, each convict will only serve 1 year in prison. So, how did this situation relate to being morally just and virtuous? If we examine the dilemma further, we find that the worst possible ending would be for both convicts to rat. Since both convicts would serve 2 years, making the total time spent in prison 4 years, this is the worst possible ending. On the other hand, if both the convicts stay silent, they will only serve a total time of 2 years, 1 year for both. If we replace ratting with being unjust and immoral, and staying silent with being virtuous, we find that if all people are virtuous and moral, society will receive the greatest reward, or the lesser of the two evils in this case. The greatest benefit of being virtuous and moral only occurs when the collective whole embraces and teaches the concepts of virtues to the younger generation. Albert Einstein once stated, "Everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." Although this quote is often used to counter standardized testing in education, I believe that this quote is also hinting at Aristotle's theory of virtues. Because a fish was never meant to climb a tree, and a fish never had the virtues to be able to climb a tree, a fish should not be made to. This is the reason, therefore, that we should not take advice from fish. Because a fish's virtues are so much different than human virtues, advice from a fish would be practically useless to us. Through the development and learning of virtues, one can live a moral life and ultimately grow an excellent character. Hey guys, just want to let you know what kind of schedule I'm thinking for the rest of the summer. So I've thought about it, and I think I'll be doing 2 videos every 3 weeks. So throughout those 3-week period, I'll be posting 2 videos at any time. It's probably going to be on either a weekend or something like that. But I decided not to do it every week because I tried to do it this time, but that just burned me out. And I decided not to do every 2 weeks, or 1 video every 2 weeks, because that's just not enough. So I thought every 3 weeks I put out 2 videos, and that's the perfect ratio for me. So thanks for making it all the way through, and thanks for watching.